Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Soldera Markets podcast. This is actually one of our market outlook episodes. So for those unfamiliar with the podcast, every quarter we run an outlook on the guarantee of origin market and some of the things that we think are most impactful. The way we structure it is we take a look back at our predictions from the previous quarter. So in this case, we're going to be looking back at Q2, and then we move into discussing short-term trends and long-term trends. And the whole episode is based off the report that's available to Soldera members. So yeah, it's great to be here with you, Al.
Hello.
Let's just dive straight in. Let's look back at Q2. How did we do?
Our general impression was that the continuing undersupply or underproduction in the market would cause something to shift. I think we eventually saw that, but we saw like quite a long dip in prices. I mean, most of the last quarter was not necessarily the best to look at from a chart perspective. I mean, we saw a long trend downwards, and kind of last couple of weeks of the quarter came in clutch and recovered quite a lot of the price that was lost. So we bottomed out at, I think it was around 40 cents, and we're back at around 80 now.
Yeah, there's been a bit of, I wouldn't say dramatic price action, but easily like 30, 40 cent gains, right? Which isn't bad.
I don't think necessarily the bearishness in the market was that justified to begin with, as we discussed, I think, in the last episode as well. But I think we are seeing the outlook improve significantly now that people are realizing what this year is shaping up to be. Though I would like to also issue a correction at the start of this episode. Last time we talked about Norway actually canceling a lot more GOs in the last calendar year than the previous one. While this was correct, it wasn't the complete full picture, and now that we have the residual mix data and we have the full picture of everything, we do know that Norway actually ended up consuming less guarantees of origin than last year, which is frustrating and annoying. And then you look at what their government has been doing, and it's even more frustrating and annoying.
I think that's a new record for us, being sidetracked by talking about Norway. It's been 2 minutes and 41 seconds into the episode.
Yes. But you have to keep in mind, the guarantees of origin market is driven by primarily two factors, the biggest exporter and the biggest importer. So the biggest exporter is Norway. They make up 1/4 of the total exports in the market. And the biggest importer is Germany, which makes significantly more than 1/4 of the imports. So
Yeah.
all of these factors together, those are really the countries you need to keep your eye on in order to understand how the supply and demand dynamics are shaping up. And what we have seen from Norway recently is a ramping up of the rhetoric of, hey, our grid is so green, guys, our electricity is so green. We don't really want to leave the guarantees of origin system, but we just want to degrade it while we make money off of it. So the current approach that they've kind of been running is, hey, all of our local companies, please just look at grid averages. Just look at grid averages. It's fine. We're producing so much renewable energy. Yeah, producers, if you want to sell guarantees of origin elsewhere, we don't really use them internally. If you have to for some other compliance reason, you can do it. But we won't make you. It's fine. On emissions accounting, you can use the grid averages while everybody else uses the market-based one. So functionally, they are really lobbying hard for making the most money out of the system, destroying the system, actively working against the system that's making the renewable energy producers money.
It's like institutionalized double counting, right? But my question is, why does everybody else allow it to happen, right?
It's a very good question. And honestly, that's the frustrating thing about how the market works. Ultimately, it is a sort of political construct. So while we do have the AIB, the Association of Issuing Bodies, who should be the watchdog and the police for these kind of things, I mean, they do have rules about these kind of things. It doesn't feel like they're particularly well equipped to deal with this kind of an approach or to police really this kind of behavior. Because ultimately what this is packaged as is sort of like a political position. Guarantees of origin, in the Norway government opinion, is just for consumer disclosure. So if you have a consumer and they want basically renewable energy into their house, then you can do it. But if it's a corporation, no, whatever, it's fine. Don't think about it too hard.
But is this messaging actually quite explicit by the Norwegian government? If we looked it up, we'd be able to find it.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. So they recently issued a press release. But what the press release essentially said was that they plan on even lobbying other governments now to make location-based emissions reporting more common, and that they will push for it more. So we are seeing this kind of a movement, which is frustrating to say the least. So what the press
Yeah.
release is titled is New Measures to Preserve Norwegian Renewable Energy as a Competitive Advantage for Businesses. What that essentially internally says is that we think location-based emissions reporting is really dope, but because we don't really want our producers to stop making money off of selling the renewable attributes, we'll
Mhm.
just like have both at the same time and just degrade the system.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like if they were totally for location based and the criticism of market based came with the acknowledgement that they were going to leave and they don't want to deal with it anymore, then that would
Yeah.
be fine. But it's this
No,
kind of double
that's a
standards that
very
isn't great.
reasonable. Exactly, that would be a very reasonable thing to do. Just like leave the system. You can like very credibly make claims about your renewable energy now. Like there's no double counting issues. Everything's solved. It's very green. But up until they do that, they're currently playing both games at the same time, and it's to the detriment of everybody else playing this.
Yeah, guys, we need to talk about Norway. Let's make that a trend. I'm gonna make an article with the title.
Yeah, we
Okay,
guys, we need to talk about Norway.
we need to talk about Norway. Obviously, you mentioned looking at Germany. Did that have a role to play in the sort of price action that we've seen so far?
Yeah. So one of the important things you need to understand about Germany is that while everybody else for their 2024 energy disclosures, so essentially like what percentage of guarantees of origin did they use, like where did the energy come from, all of this. So most places do this by end of March. March is the deadline. End of March, they have like a pretty clear picture. Somewhere in April, things start getting a bit clearer. In May, like things are rather clear, and essentially we have an idea of what's happening. But the thing is, Germany's disclosure deadline for 2024 is actually in the end of June. So that's
Okay.
very unusual. They have this separate time schedule for how everything plays out. It used to be, I think, even later into the year. They've moved it up. It's in the middle of the year, and it's kind of awkward from that perspective. Because, well, they just have a different schedule of things. And this ultimately means that you see more market activity from the German energy market somewhere in June, instead of seeing it with the rest of the market somewhere in March.
Is the fact that this deadline is different, does that have anything to do with the fact that Germany is the biggest consumer, or is it just purely coincidental?
I think that's coincidental. Germany has pretty reasonable systems in the sense of you can't use 2024 GOs for 2025 consumption. So they have that yearly matching system happening that many countries don't. Generally, like a lot of the market activity, you'd expect to be around the 2024 GOs as well. But what we did see is that utilities and consumer facing electricity providers also hedged their bets and just made sure that they're protected against the market movements. Because ultimately, what we're seeing this year is that we in Europe have produced somewhere between 8 to 9% less renewable energy so far than we produced last year up to this time frame. So we are around 50 terawatt hours behind right now.
That's interesting, and I think I don't know, it's a sticky place to be when you're in a environmental commodities industry like EACs, because if your revenue like relies on EACs, being higher in price, then you're kind of it's a bittersweet feeling when renewable production is less. But at the same time, you remember that like this tool is designed to be elastic, right? The reason the
Yes.
price is high is because you want to incentivize renewable production. So we all have a stake in making sure these markets work efficiently and correctly.
Yeah, exactly. From the perspective of a new producer coming in, the funny thing about renewable energy production is that when the sun is shining to all of your neighbors as well, right? Like
Mm.
ultimately, if you have solar panels have this tendency of what's called cannibalizing the demand. So essentially, everybody's all trying to service the same demand. So ultimately, there do come these like hard limits of okay, this is about as much renewable energy production of that kind that can exist in this area before we have good options of storing this electricity in batteries, right?
Yeah.
In some sort of storage solution.
I mean, you mentioned it was very sunny in Estonia, I think, a week ago, and you said,
Yeah.
electricity is basically free, right? Like you sent a solar
Yes.
screenshot to Slack, like, yeah, crazy.
Yeah, essentially in Estonia, I have this like joke of like, oh, look, the sun's shining. That means electricity is like 100% free. Turn on your AC, like everything's fine. The situation we're in like many areas of the world, and I think this somewhat plays a role in also why we're seeing a bit of less production than we were seeing last year. Obviously, there's a lot of factors to this, actually. Part of this is that even on hydro, we've been underproducing last year's levels, which I think to many was perhaps unexpected because of how full we've seen the Scandinavian hydro reserves be uh, for the last year. They've been significantly above average filled. But now they're coming more down to this average. We're 5% above historical averages at this point, which isn't. And at the same time, the prediction is we're heading into a very dry, very warm, very hot summer. So all of these things together, we're expecting hydro production to be down compared to last year. We're expecting that reserves to get eaten away at a bit more. And the whole picture altogether is that we're expecting renewable energy production to lag behind last year's levels this year, which does have positive impacts on the guarantees of origin market in the bittersweet way you described before.
But my understanding about hydro in Norway is it's not the entire country that gets analyzed, and you have to look at also the distribution, right? Am I correct in thinking that?
Yes, so a lot of these reserves are currently in the northern parts of Norway. So the southern parts aren't nearly as full, to my understanding. So Norway has multiple bidding zones of electricity prices in general, and because of that, the dynamics are a bit different since there is a long distance the electricity needs to travel to get to where it needs to go. That affects the unit economics of it. That affects how reasonable it is to actually start emptying your reserves deep in northern Norway if demand is coming somewhere in a very southern part of the country, or perhaps even moving through the transmission lines down to mainland Europe. These central European countries.
Now let's talk about demand, right? I mean, we've just
Mhm.
gone over all of the things that are impacting supply in the short term. Where do you see demand going?
So one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that we're now entering this period of time where trading volumes are generally a bit lower. There's just less parties trying to sell their supply. There's less parties buying that supply. There's just less activity in the market. And that's not necessarily bad. That's not necessarily good. It just means that we can expect to see a bit more volatility as the liquidity is lower. So there's less parties trying to buy and sell. That means at any point in time, finding the right buyer, finding the right seller that's willing to do something at a certain price, it's lower.
Mm,
So because of that, we might see a bit higher swings in the market in either direction during this
yeah,
time. But
there's
what
more
we are
disagreement,
seeing,
right?
yes. But what we are seeing is that because there's so much uncertainty about how the rest of the year is going to play out, and this is going to be one of these years, by all indicators we're looking at, this is going to be one of these years where we have a record lowering of the general oversupply that we have in the guarantees of origin market. The guarantees of origin market historically quite oversupplied. There's like hundreds of terawatt hours of guarantees of origin that just essentially get rolled over in a very complicated way. But this is going to be one of these years where we actually chip into that quite significantly. And I think that's going to be a very positive development. What we do see is that there's a lot of uncertainty on demand side of where the prices are going to go because of this. And because of that, we might see a bit higher interest in hedging their bets and making sure that they're not caught out if there is a more liquidity contraction and people get a bit more spooked and worried that there isn't the right guarantee of origin for them available at the time where they finally need it.
So just to summarize, July and August are pretty much always typically super low volume, and now
Yeah.
that's kind of compounded by the fact that all of the compliance related deadlines are behind us. So
Yes. So
yeah.
we're essentially working towards the 2025 compliance deadline now instead of the 2024 one, which we've been doing so far. In the guarantees of origin market, you can use guarantees of origin for last year's consumption a bit later than the end of the year. So there's this couple of months at the end where you usually do all of the market activities that you still need to do. That time is now over. The market has done this already, and now we're looking towards the future. So we're thinking about 2025 compliance. What's going to happen when we have the next compliance deadline? Do we have all of the guarantees of origin we'll need? Are we properly spread out in terms of our risk? Are we hoping too much that the prices will be a certain way once it reaches that point, or do we want to deal with part of that question right now?
And when it comes to 2025 vintage positioning, does that usually happen around Q4?
That happens generally around Q4, but we do see that activity happen all across the year, actually. So you usually see the current vintage really come into its own and really take over the spot trading activity exactly after all of these compliance deadlines have passed. Going to generally expect the 2024 vintages to now start. They're going through their end of life procedure where people just try to get rid of them at whatever price possible because they are going to expire soon. At some point, you're just not going to be able to trade them anymore. You're going to want to get them out of your inventory. You're going to want to rotate it.
Okay, nice. So I think a topic that we first saw in our last market outlook was the kind of discussion around new use cases for GOs, especially with like state qualification for aid and subsidy. And I think Italy was a good example of that. Has anything changed in that sort of area?
Well, we still continue to see this development of certain subsidy schemes that you can only benefit from if you are using some percent of renewable energy. So there are quite a couple of countries that have some sort of this subsidy scheme for their industries. So that's definitely continuing. But on the other hand, we do need to keep in mind that on the European Union level, the discussions on CSRD aren't necessarily very bullish for the guarantees of origin market, which is also why I think we don't see such a highly pronounced forward curve as we did perhaps at some point. Like, if you try to sell 2026 or 2027, the difference between those is going to be a bit less, I think, than we saw previously in terms of how this premium was getting priced in. Because there is uncertainty. There's a bit of uncertainty of how fast the demand is going to grow, because the discussions that we're seeing right now are going to limit the scope of how many companies actually have to do all of the CSRD reporting. And that's getting delayed, that's getting renegotiated. What's getting put into those reports is getting renegotiated, it's getting streamlined. So a lot of these discussions are happening right now. There's nothing final, but we do see what feels like an inevitable conclusion that CSRD is going to get weakened to some extent. And what it looks like right now is that we're going to see significantly less companies overall having themselves to comply with this. But it's not all doom and gloom. And I'd like to explain why it's not all doom and gloom. So when you are one of these large corporations that has to do emissions reporting, you generally have to force that down your supply chain to some bigger or smaller degree. As a consequence of that, if you're a very large corporation, even if you don't fall under the CSRD requirement, you still might have kind of upstream from you organizations that do have those requirements and then demand that you follow them to some extent as well. I think we're gonna take a big loss when it comes to transparency on these kind of things. I don't know if we're necessarily gonna see that big of a loss in terms of demand. We'll see.
Do we have the numbers? I think last time we spoke about CSRD, we understood what was at stake, right? We had the kind of speculation on the timeline purely because things move through the EU at the speed of government, as we like to say.
Yes.
But yeah, did you know the numbers?
Yes, we have seen some numbers which essentially have estimated that while right now the expectation is that around 50,000 companies need to do CSRD reporting, that number is going to get cut down to around 10,000. So that's an 80% reduction in scope. But it is going to keep affecting the largest, biggest organizations. So these would be over 1,000 employees and over 450 million euros in turnover. So the threshold is quite high because previously the lowest bar was 250 employees or 40 million euros of turnover. So the general scope is going to go down, but I don't think that's necessarily the end of the world. It is just a bit disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to reiterate the point. I think I made it in the last episode as well. Is like one of the benefits of reducing the scope is you then, I mean, if the political willpower is there, you have a much more tightly defined category of the people who you already know are the biggest emitters, right? Especially if they're the largest companies.
Yeah.
So if there is the willpower to, make more use cases for geos, then it's easy to apply it without also affecting the small guys as well.
Yes, that is true. I think also we really need to keep in mind that the CSRD does also deserve some level of simplification. I mean, it's thousands of data points that from a compliance perspective, I don't think it's necessarily in the most reasonable state right now. I think it's a lot of work, and I'm not necessarily sure everything that's being collected is even useful for anyone particularly.
Do you want to give
So
context on the amount of CSRD data you've been looking at yourself?
Uh, the funny thing is that we have somebody internally working on analyzing CSRD data, and it's so non-standardized that we can't manage to like throw everything into a single structure, even though it's almost prescribed on a EU level. Not everything is as standardized and as specific as you might expect, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of data points, and not all of these are even quantitative. Some of these are qualitative, so they're just like subjective, not measured things. They're just like here's what we're doing about it.
All right, let's move on to talking about hydrogen. So hydrogen, I think we've discussed it in the past from the standpoint of the criteria and how it relates to guarantees of origin. We haven't been too happy about, but it's been looking up, right? So what do you think?
Yeah, I'm happy where this is going. I guess we'll see how this plays out, but there has been lobbying to relax these RFNBO requirements. So previously we've discussed the fact that if you want to have green hydrogen, it needs to be in the same neighborhood, has to be basically proven additional demand. It has to be timed in like 1 hour increments. It has to have like a whole lot of things that the market is just not capable of supporting in any meaningful way right now. On like a measurable level, we just don't have the technological infrastructure to support this, and there's no ambition to create it. So we're kind of in this strange state, and there is some lobbying on the EU Parliament level of loosening these constraints and just having it be more reasonable so you could actually buy guarantees of origin, use them for the purposes of creating green hydrogen with less complex accounting around it, because I don't think the current state is something that the market is just able to support even as like best effort. It feels like something put together by a consultant who I'm sure had the best intentions, but the reality of things is if you are expecting things to move at the speed of government, you have to be pragmatic around where do you set the goalpost, and how do you make sure that goalpost can even be reached in a reasonable time? Because if it is like, hey, we have this nice goalpost, hey, look at how nice the goalpost is, but the goalpost is so far away you can't even see it, then who cares? Like, what is it going to do for you?
And I think you don't even have to be tapped into energy or even really sustainability to understand that hydrogen it's been underwhelming, and I think anyone can tell you that, even if they're not in the industry. So
no. But the hope is if it does end up getting relaxed, that can be quite a significant driver of guarantees of origin demand over time, especially as we figure out how to use these extremely low renewable energy prices during certain parts of the day and actually take advantage of that more and stabilize the grid. I think that's a very positive outcome that we can have from hydrogen. But, we'll see.
any ballpark figure for the demand increase, do you think?
We've seen estimates going to hundreds of terawatt hours a year. That's the best I can do. Honestly,
It's
at
good.
this point, it more feels like tea leaf reading
It's fine. Honestly,
activities.
hundreds of terawatts works for me. You can stop talking now. We'll leave it then.
Yeah, let's go for hundreds of terawatts. Like, if by 2030 we'll have hundreds of terawatts of geo demand just coming from hydrogen, I'd also be incredibly happy.
So I think something to understand about the EU is that like you have these high level directives, and then things get transposed into national law and national policy, right? But as I understand, you've identified that there's like a divergence in certain national policies that's impacting long term your kind of your opinions on the market. Do you want to talk about that?
It's complicated, right? Because I mean, one of the interesting things that we did see at some point in this last quarter was French guarantees of origin got like an incredible premium on the market at some point, and then I've never looked too deep into the French geo market, but then I found out that they actually have monthly matching when it comes to demand and supply. So uh, I mean, there are so much more reasonable ways of using guarantees of origin that I think governments should adopt. And on one hand, we're seeing Norway go like, no, we just use location based, and everybody else can count their renewable energy against our geos, and everybody's
Yeah,
happy, right? While in Germany, we have this logic of no, we need to like go harder, we need to do more, we need to electrify faster. We need to move our industry into using renewable energy. We need to actually take advantage of the electricity prices, and we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure to actually use what we're putting out there, right? So I think there are multiple different ways governments are approaching this, and personally, I really just hope that on an EU level, somebody gets the guts to just propose like, no, like 2024 geos for 2024 demand, 2025 geos for 2025. That
yeah.
would be so reasonable. That
I
would
think
be like,
we're
yeah,
gonna reach a tipping point where it has to happen. Yeah,
speed
we
of
can't keep
government.
going on like this. Yeah.
Yeah, speed of government. Like, I'm not holding my breath. I would suffocate.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah.
hopeful. I am legitimately hopeful, but these things like take so long that
Mm.
it's like a generational timescale kind of activity more than anything.
It's interesting you mentioned auctions because we haven't actually touched on auctions this episode so far. I think some context for listeners is that whilst you also have like you have private entities in the geo markets, they coordinate auctions, Soldera being one of them. You also have governments, right? And they get
Mhm.
involved and they do things very differently. Some of them set price floors that they're unwilling to, go below, and they try and control it. And you also have governments who like divvy it up by region. So you touched on France, but it'd be nice if you can expand on how you see like governments impacting trends more broadly and how people who are interested in analyzing the geo market can kind of look at government options.
Yeah, so the French auction is, I think, one of the most reliable in the market in terms of like they move nice, good amounts of volume. The last auction was a very good indicator. For example, they put a lot of terawatt hours onto the market. The market responded positively. Prices actually ended up going up. There was more buying interest. There was more trading interest. At the same time, we have another relatively big auction, which is the Italian one. But the Italian one just feels like a problematic series of events that never seem to play out just how they are expecting it to. They set price floors that make the auction fail at least partially. They go like, no, I'm not selling you any of my expiring geos. Like, these are premium expiring geos. I'll have like I would rather have them expire than you give me a couple of cents.
Yeah.
So we have seen like an unreasonable amount of guaranteed margin end up actually
Interesting.
just dying from that
So,
over the
what does
years.
their residual mix look like in Italy? Is there significant amounts of expired geos that go into their making it renewable?
That's a good question. I don't have the residual energy mix in front of me right now.
I'll take a look
You
at
do
that.
also need to keep in mind that it does get spread out over the market a bit more,
Okay.
due to just how everything moves around in the market. So the residual energy mix does take into account how the geos are moving in and out of the market. But the thing about Italy specifically is that they ended up being a net importer, I think, as a perhaps a market surprise to everybody, mostly because of just how their auctions were unable to fill out the demand that was in the market.
Gotcha. All right, so now onto the kind of second part of our long-term market drivers, which we kind of call like the structural demand growth. So that kind of looks at things like corporate momentum. So yeah, why don't we start there? We touched on CSRD a little bit, but you think
Mhm.
there's kind of broader implications for Scope 2 that are happening?
Yes. So what we have seen in CSRD reports, now that we're out, now that we can read them, we have been processing them on our own as well. I think the podcast might get an episode soon about the results, actually. But
Mm.
we've been analyzing the CSRD reports. We've seen other organizations analyzing them. And the reality is that a lot of them are using guarantees of origin. Like, it's pretty clear and explicit from the data. So we're quite happy to see that. We're quite happy to see their disclosed targets on climate. And we don't necessarily see those commitments significantly reversing over the next couple of years. So demand in 2024 was up. CSRD reports clearly show guarantees of origin usage and PPA usage and actual interest in by corporations of using renewable energy.
Mm.
That's generally, I would say, positive, even though you do have to keep in mind that these CSRD requirements are being weakened a bit, and that will have some sort of an impact. I just don't think it'll have as big of an impact as people assume it will.
Yeah, it's so interesting. This could go either way, right? So I mean, I'm
Mhm.
leaning towards agreeing with you that CSRD isn't as necessarily as like catastrophic as people think it is with the changes. But
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly, because it gets passed down the supply chain. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to.
Mm.
There's quite an aggressive push in the whole supply chain of
Yeah.
doing something about it, and you ultimately see that materialize in various ways. Uh, Many of them just being, "Hey, let's electrify more of our industrial process. Let's get some arc
Mm.
furnaces. Let's get some electrolyzers."
So it's kind of like a cascading effect, right, down the
Yeah.
supply chain. Okay, so finally, and I'm sure lots of people are waiting for this, forward markets. We spoke a little bit about how you think that 2026 and 2027 might not perform as well as we have seen them do in the past. Is that the forward curve declining? What do you think is happening?
So the forward curve is still pretty strong in the sense of 2026 geos are valued at 50% premium above 2025 geos right now. So there is a
Mm.
willingness to lock in that certainty for next year for a lot of organizations. And I think they're just looking at the general price right now and going like, well, isn't that bad, right?
Mm.
You'd lock in a 1.5 euros if your expectation is that it might go up to 3 or 4. On the other end, from a producer perspective, you'd lock in 1.4 euros if your expectation is that it might go to 0. But there is a pretty healthy supply and demand dynamic that's giving a relatively good premium over the spot prices for 2026 right now. And we're seeing a small premium on top of that for 2027, a smaller premium even than that for 2028. But the near future kind of forward purchases of 2026 seems to be the sweet spot of you get a pretty significant premium for that compared to spot prices. And the market does seem to be pricing in an expectation that this oversupply will get better, that there will not be this much circulating infinite supply in the market for older vintages as time goes on.
Is it worth talking about like the demographics of who's actually interested in forward markets? My understanding is it's mainly like utilities who are
Yeah.
trying to hedge their kind of future potential like positions. So
Yes. Part of
yeah.
this is utilities. Utilities is definitely a big part of it because you have to keep in mind that all of these utilities selling consumer products such as we bring renewable energy to your home, they don't necessarily follow the market price when it comes to what they charge for that service, right?
Mm.
They don't say like, oh, guarantees of origin were like €1 today, so we're going to charge you €1.10. They're more likely going to be like, yeah, this is a service. It costs €5 per megawatt hour. It's what we're offering, take it or leave it. That's, if you're a consumer, that's what it costs. And ultimately, because of that, they do want to spread this out a bit more and make sure that they can hold on to a healthy premium on what they're doing over there. So the renewable part of the renewable energy package that they're selling, it does lend itself quite well to just making sure that they're hedged and averaged out
Yeah.
enough that whatever price they're offering the service at, they make money off of it.
So
The
you're
second
saying
part,
that, sorry, I just want to quickly,
yeah,
you're saying that even at like 50% premiums, they're looking at that and they're thinking, well, this still works for us because it's worse than, I mean, it's better than there not being any supply available, right, when we need it, right?
yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
better than being in a situation where there's a price shock, there's some sort of a liquidity squeeze, and hey, look, suddenly you're not making money off of selling renewable energy.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
that a lot of these packages aren't priced based on some sort of a market price, because in the geo market, everything's so over the counter that there's not necessarily that kind of a thing available to everybody at any given moment, right?
Cool.
So from that perspective, you just want to make sure that you're making money off of the renewable energy that you do so. And that comes down to making sure that you have your supply and demand locked in.
I think, yeah, the final forward market signal is kind of like this infrastructure evolution. You're going to have to lead on that one because when I hear infrastructure evolution, I hear another long conversation about granularity that nobody needs to hear again.
Oh,
But yeah,
no, we're
feel
not
free.
talking about granularity this time, but we are seeing a couple more governments come out with their own auctions. I think Bulgaria is
That's
one of
cool.
them. Like, there are a couple more auctions coming into the market. I'm happy always to see these kind of things. I don't think they all
Yeah.
necessarily will end up working, but if we do see some increased liquidity, I'm happy with that. And there's just more venues, and I'm not sure if like more venues is necessarily what we need, but that seems to be where things are heading. While at the same time, at Soldera, we're more focused on making sure everything's interoperable and you can move things around and you can you get it from one country, use it in another, make everything super streamlined, make everything very convenient. So that's generally where we see the market going.
Yeah.
While there are these kind of menus that fragment things, we are trying to work exactly in the opposite direction. We want to
Mm.
make sure everything's nice and interoperable, easy to access, easy, convenient, streamlined.
Well, I think it's not that the new venues are trying to fragment things. It's the fact that there are new venues all the time. That is the fragmentation in itself,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, exactly.
Um,
Like, that's a consequence of them seeing that the market is what it is. But the reality of it is that the market is in this shape for a reason, and the reason ends up being that liquidity is weird over here. Like, a
yeah.
guarantee of origin for one organization might be worth a different amount to another sometimes. Uh, the exchange kind of model gets a bit complicated to manage. You need the right buyer in the right place at the right time to make those kind of things work, and the right seller and the right buyer are not necessarily on the same venue at the same time in this market. It's
Gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha. Well, we usually wrap up talking about forwards and how Solara can help people who are interested in forwards. But you also just spoke a little bit about virtual accounts and kind of our long term plans. So I don't
Mhm.
know, which of those two features would you like to just quickly promote at the end?
Yeah, so we can talk a bit about our future plans right now. One of the things that we're actively working on is making sure that if you need registry services in one country and you need to cancel something in one country or another, and you need help or services with that, we're actively working on solutions to service you to make it very easy and simple for you. So if that is something you're interested in, if you'd like to handle all of the geos across all of your countries in a streamlined point and click kind of way, uh, get in touch with us. Let's see
Yeah,
if we can help you.
awesome. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap with our Q3 outlook. As a reminder, a full formal report with all of the data we have is available inside the Soldera app for our members. But other than that, yeah, thank you very much, Al, and catch us in the next one.
All right. Cheers. Bye.